have to have been living under a damn rock if you hadn't at least heard of Gaslands in 2021. It's a game that's been on my radar for quite a while now, and for a number of good reasons. Vehicular combat in the post-apocalypse is probably what I would choose if Wargames keywords were gelato and you were paying for my ice cream. There's a lot there that appeals to me. And I just have so many fond memories of playing with Matchbox cars and Hot Wheels cars as a kid, and I can even remember me and my older brothers taking to some of our toy cars with miniature paints back at the time, so I feel like Gaslands should be as natural to me as flamering a raider camp is to your average Fallout player. And so it is as part of my continuing effort to shine a light on games outside of the sphere of the big red and gold brand that I thought I'd take a little dive into Gaslands. But I don't think we should go over how to play and the rules and all that kind of thing, because first and foremost this is a hobby channel. So I think we should convert and paint a toy car. That sounds like fun. And I feel like this is the best way that I can get an idea of the Gaslands experience, as it's mostly going to apply to me, because whenever I take on a new hobby game, I always spend far more time hobbying it than I do playing it. That's the kind of player I am. So let's go. I grabbed this 52 Chevy pickup recently, and it was specifically for this purpose. Not only does it have the exact kind of body shape I was picturing when I imagined what I'd want to do for Gaslands, but it should also have a nice bit of space to add the elements that I want to add. However, a toy car alone does not a Dark Future Carnage buggy make. So I also did some scouring over Colts 3D and came up with this little glut of parts to experiment with for my design. And I've linked all of these parts in the description below so that you can support the creators of them and check them out for yourself. And so here are those parts all printed, cleaned up and ready to be glued to my buggy of buggeration. Notice that there's a few different engines and gunners and stuff, and that's because those are parts I wasn't sure about, so I wanted to be free to experiment with whether or not I included them and which ones I did include. Gaslands is a game that encourages a lot of variety, and so you're gonna find yourself doing this kind of thing, whether you're using parts out of your bits box or 3D printed parts. So next comes the part where I have to put all of this together, and I figured the best way to deliver this to you was with a short little time lapse. So I didn't really see the point in breaking this down. It's kind of just gluing stuff to other stuff, and I credit you with enough intelligence to not need to be shown in at least specific detail how that works. So we're going to go to a little time lapse here, and I just want you to understand really what I'm trying to achieve here. Good strong joins are important, so I'm not being too stingy with the glue, and that's fine because glue overspill just looks like welding once you've painted it silver anyway. Straight lines where they make sense. I want to encourage straight lines in the sense of, you know, a wonky structure won't make for a strong violence vehicle, so I want there to be strong looking structure, and that's straight lines. And well, for this four-wheeled mobile temple to the god of diesel drinking danger dodgems to look mean as hell. My influences here are definitely going to lean more in the Fallout direction than Mad Max, and that's because personally that's my preferred post-nuclear hellscape, and it's also why I chose a 50s car as my base to build from. But when all is said and done and the glue is dry, this Betty is still going to be mighty evil looking and ready to rip and tear. So here's my completed assembly, ready for me to start getting some paint on. I did lose some footage here sadly where I put super glue on some of the surfaces and then hit it with accelerator. It dries textured and makes really great corrosion spots, so I'm sorry that I lost that footage. And I also unfortunately lost some footage where I roughed up the windows with a Dremel. Bit of a bad YouTuber day. Sorry. Now to begin my painting process, I'm going to get the truck sprayed black first of all. I actually went with a matte black finish for this one because that's what I actually wanted the finished paintwork to be anyway, so I just sprayed it with a couple of coats of matte black. Now thinking back to my recent video where we were talking about chronological layering, the next thing I want to do is the kind of stuff that was on the car when it was brand new. So I'm thinking to go with that nice matte black paint job, some flames on the bonnet is going to be perfect. And of course by putting that freehand in first, it's going to be much easier to weather over it as and when I need to than it would be to freehand around weathering. That would be a lot more difficult. So the freehand goes in now. And I suppose the other big upfront job would be blocking in all of the metal, so I got that done. This doesn't just include things that are ostensibly finished in metal, I also need to lay metal into the areas that are exposed by corrosion. And as you can clearly see here, once those metallics are in, it makes a huge difference to the piece as a whole. All we have to do now is indulge ourselves in the extensive weathering process. And I'll be getting straight on with this, skipping over the painting of the gunner, since there's enough examples of me painting armoured soldiers on the channel. So instead, I'm going to start with a wash of Nuln Oil to get some depth into those metals before we start weathering them all down. And once that's done and dusted, we can begin with some grime and rust and general detritus. First port of call for me is always a wash with a really dark brown to simulate that deeply corroded metal. And then our next layer on top of that is a more orange, sort of ochre-y kind of brown. This not only simulates another layer of corrosion, but also starts to add a dirty kind of weathered look. And then from there, we're going to move on to a step that I actually often think is missed out in weathering. We want to re-expose some of that metal, create fresh chips and dings that have happened after the rust has taken hold. So it's back to some silver now to do just that, focusing on areas where contacts and bangs are likely to have occurred. Right, and now I want to actually pause for a moment. I want to just stop a second and take stock of what we've done so far, because there's quite a lot of technique gone into this small car. The first thing to note here is that I've made a point of tracing a thin silver line around the big rusted areas. This is just to show corrosion lifting new paint and stripping it back further. You'll also notice I've paid a lot of attention to scratches in places where impacts will happen. So we're now ready to push through to the last two layers of effects that I want to apply to this car. The next of those is using a bright orange to do some streaking rusty watermarks. Just all over the vehicle, in the recesses, down places where it would be logical for drips to be run in, that kind of thing. Use your imagination, look at examples online if you're not sure. Then to wrap things up, the last process is going to be to use two different colours of weathering powder. And I recommend putting some paper down to do this because it does love to go everywhere. First we'll use a sand colour just to skirt the vehicle in some accumulated, kicked up sandy dust, just by dabbing it on with a flat brush. And then we'll use some black weathering powder to blacken the tops of the exhausts. Not only does this completely matte them out, but it gives them that nice kind of smoke blackened look. And we can also fix these powders at this point. We just need to use a sparing application of white spirit dabbed on with a wet brush, and that's going to fix those powders reasonably well in place and stop them moving around too easily. And then with all of those processes done, we can finally reveal our finished car. And I have to say, during this modding experience and the painting therein, I was certainly enjoying a lovely nostalgia trip. But I have to be completely honest with you, the actual processes were very run-of-the-mill for me. And this meant that, whilst it was definitely a fun time, by the time I'd finished my car, it didn't really feel any different to if I'd just finished painting a tank or another weathered vehicle for wargaming. Now, this isn't necessarily a problem, but I'm trying to relay my experience here, and I'd built this up in my head as it was going to be this big, crazy, fun nostalgia trip. So when the hobbying process was pretty similar to a lot of stuff I'd done in the past, there was maybe a slight feeling of emptiness left behind. And don't get me wrong, if you dig that, great. Have a great time with it. I had a great time with it. I just think it's fair to provide a warning that if you're an experienced wargamer who's looking for a profoundly new experience with Gaslands, you might not find that in the hobby side, and you may be expecting to because of the radically different base onto which we're working. That aside, it was actually a really good time, and it's an entirely positive experience that I highly recommend you give a go. I'm looking forward to grabbing the rules for this one so that I can try a game of it as well, mostly because I'm curious to see how it plays, but also just it's cheap enough that you may as well give it a try. Gaslands was actually recommended to me over a year ago now by my good friend Renfield, so it is kind of about time I got on with giving it a go. So a final quick summary of Gaslands as a hobby. Absolutely brilliant if you have a 3D printer or an extensive bits box and you're wanting an excuse to use those. Absolutely brilliant if you enjoy weathering and chipping and battle damage and that kind of thing. It really looks the part in this setting, so you're going to get to explore that whole bunch. Absolutely great, bit of a no-brainer, if you enjoy painting vehicles. Of course it is, because you're pretty much exclusively painting vehicles. And the only tiny downside really is just that fact that if you do approach it expecting a profoundly different and new hobby experience, you might feel a little bit let down, because at the end of the day, it is pretty similar to painting a tank for your Warhammer 40,000 army. And that is a nitpick, it is a minor thing, so don't let it put you off. Try Gaslands, it's probably going to be really fun. I mean, let's be honest, if you're even watching this channel, you probably like painting miniatures. So another hobby that's very similar to painting miniatures, it's probably going to be a hobby you'll enjoy, right? So I say give it a go. It's a laid-back painting experience and it's dirt cheap. You've really got very little to lose. And on that note, I think I'm about done with my first little look into the hobby experience of Gaslands, so don't forget to do things with thumbs and bells if you're so inclined to do so, and of course check the links in the description if you want to either support the channel or find me on social media. There's links to all that stuff there for you to get stuck into. So until next time folks, I'd love to thank you for watching, I'd like to wish you happy hobbying, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye for now.